Next, we have Tony Marr. Now, Tony grew up in Las Vegas, but in recent years, he's been all over the country telling stories. When I asked him about the pandemic, um, something positive that maybe that has come out of this pandemic, he said that he has learned to be a farmer. And so, without further ado, welcome Tony Marr.
Hey, Catherine, you said that your story is 500 years old. My story is about 5 days old. So hopefully all those words that Libby said about old being good and good being old and all of that, hopefully none of that will apply to this story. Like Libby said, I grew up in a big city. And growing up in a big city like Las Vegas, living there my entire childhood, I would watch TV shows with my mom and my dad and my little brother, like Little House on the Prairie or The Waltons. I would watch these rural shows and I would dream of what it would be like to live in a place with land, a place with water, maybe even a place with animals. Once a year, we would visit my grandparents who lived in a suburb of Baltimore, Maryland. Now, in the 80s and 90s, Baltimore was a larger city than my home of Las Vegas. But where my grandparents lived was closer to Amish country in Pennsylvania and in Delaware than it was to the inner city or inner harbor of Baltimore. So we would love when we would get to my grandparents' house. My brother and I would go out of their back deck. They had acres and acres of land. There was a bamboo forest. There was a giant pond with a creek and grass that stretched for miles. There was a horse farm right across the street from their house. And we loved going out and exploring all of the land that my grandparents had. After dinner, my grandmother would get all of the scraps left over from dinner. She'd put them into a big pail, and my brother and I would go out with my grandmother. We'd set them out in the yard, where overnight the squirrels and turtles and deer would come, and while they would eat the scraps, they would magically be gone every morning. I grew up dreaming of living somewhere like that someday. So when I moved to East Tennessee, my first requirement in buying a home was that I needed to have land. I wanted land. You ain't no kind of man if you ain't got land. I wanted land, and I got just that. 1/4 of an acre in Johnson City, walking distance to Sam's Club. It wasn't quite what I had in mind, but it was 3 times as much land as I had ever had before. And I was happy. A few years later, I moved to Bristol and I bought a house that wasn't in the city limits. It was in the county, and I had 9/10 of an acre, almost a full acre of land. The very first day that I was in my new house, I was sitting in the dining room that had this beautiful bay window that overlooked our backyard. I was eating some lunch. It was the middle of the day, and coming running across my backyard, I saw a tiny baby deer. This was my dream. I was living my dream. Now, I lived in that house for 6 more years, and I never saw another animal other than my dog. So in 2019, when Amanda and I were getting married and we were looking to buy a house together and make a change, we looked at what seemed like hundreds of houses, but I only had 2 criteria. I needed to have enough room for our family of 9, and I needed land. Not 1/4 of an acre, not even an acre. I needed land. So Amanda found us a beautiful home on 13 acres of land with a pond, a stream, a creek, and a 6,000 square foot barn. Our first night in our new home, after we got everything settled and the kids all in bed, Amanda and I sat on our front porch, overlooking countless miles of farmland, and we witnessed the most breathtaking sunset that I had ever seen. And just like that, we were farmers. The only problem was the only thing that we were farming at that point in time was grass. And my self-propelled push mower wasn't cutting it on my 13 acres. It was taking me 111 hours to mow my yard every single week. By the time I got finished, it was time for me to start again. So we got together and had an idea. I could waste my life away push mowing our 13 acres of land every week for 8 months out of the year. Or option number 2, I could get a tractor. What we quickly found out, though, was that we couldn't afford a tractor. I don't know if you know this, but you can buy a new car for the cost of a small tractor, and you can buy a small country for the price of a nice tractor. Not only could I not afford a tractor, I didn't know the first thing about how to operate a tractor. I went down to the John Deere place, Meade tractor. I couldn't even figure out how to get into the thing. A tractor was simply out of the question for us. But we had another idea. Our third option, our third idea, would take care of our out-of-control lawn. It would create some wonderful moments for our kids. And it would generate some nice side income for our family. We would get goats. Now, I spent weeks researching what kind of goats we were going to get. Boer goats, Corb goats, pygmy goats, Nigerian dwarf goats. What would be perfect for us? And while I spent that time researching goats, Amanda spent that time looking on Craigslist and Facebook for the perfect future members of our family. We finally decided that we would raise pygmy goats. They're small, they're friendly, they're great with kids, and they command a premium on the black market. We decided that we wanted to start slow. We would just get one goat. We talked about it, we read, we researched, and we decided that we wanted a girl because we really, really wanted to breed, and a girl is necessary for that. I guess you could say that a boy is necessary for that too, but we wanted a girl. Amanda showed me picture after picture after picture of beautiful, cute baby goats, and we made call after call after call. But female goats are sold the second that they're listed. And time after time, we had our hopes and our excitement shattered. It was the Wednesday before Mother's Day, just a few weeks ago. And Amanda showed me a picture of the cutest gray, black, and white baby goat that I'd ever seen in my entire life. She was a little more than we had wanted to pay, but she was precious. She made my heart melt just looking at her picture on a phone, and I knew that we had to have her, but we'd been through this so many times before. And so I asked Amanda, I said, when was she listed? This morning, she said. Call, what are you waiting for? Call now, I quickly implied her. So sitting at the dining room table in my parents' kitchen, Amanda made the call. I don't know if you've ever been sitting across a table from someone who's on the phone and you're trying to decipher how the conversation is going when you can only hear one part of the conversation. It's gut-wrenching. You try and figure out what's happening in the conversation by looking at the facial expressions and the body language. I looked at Amanda. She's still available? She looked at me, shaking her head and nodding and smiling in approval. But then her face quickly turned downcast. Oh, okay, I see. What's happening? What's he saying? What's he saying? Shh. No, what's he saying? Okay, so how much? What's he saying? Stop, I'll tell you. Shh. Okay, let me talk to my husband and I'll get back with you shortly. I got to tell you, those 30 seconds that she was on that phone call felt like an eternity. She hung up and she looked at me. So what's going on? What's happening? Well, she's still available. Great, that's incredible. So what's the problem? She's only 6 days old. 6 days old? Okay, that was a bit disappointing. From all the research that we had done, we knew that a goat needed to be about 6 weeks old before they were weaned from their mama and sent to their new home. I was hoping to get Amanda this goat for her Mother's Day present. Waiting another month was bad news, but it wasn't the end of the world, especially for this cutie. So I said, okay, that's fine. We'll just wait 5 weeks. No, Amanda said, we can get her right now. What? We can get her right now? Yeah. Their stipulation in selling her is that we have to take the mama and the daddy goats too. It's a package deal, all three or nothing. What? Well, how much for all three? Same price. The price is for all three of the goats. Now, I married an amazing woman, and Amanda was thinking responsibly. See, we know nothing about farming, and we especially know nothing about goat farming. So going from 0 goats to 3 goats might be a bit much. But me, I was thinking resourcefully. There were 2 baby makers and 1 baby daddy. Cha-ching. This was going to be a gold mine. For me, there was nothing to think about it. How hard could it be to raise 3 goats? Let's get them. Let's take care of this. We're going to start having babies like crazy. We're going to have a goat farm and we're going to be rich. Amanda called them back and told them that we were in. We made arrangements that we would meet in the parking lot of the Jonesboro Library on Sunday, Mother's Day morning at 11 a.m. I guess that I first knew that we were out of our element when they pulled into the parking lot of the library driving a dually pickup truck and pulling a horse trailer. Maybe they had several other animals that they had in there that they were dropping off to other people along the way. A big burly man that reminded me of Paul Bunyan got out of the truck and started looking around the parking lot. He was in overalls with a cut-off sleeveless t-shirt, wearing work boots that his overalls were tucked into. I looked at him and I felt like I was growing as a farmer just being in his presence. So I hopped out of my Kia Optima and walked towards him. "You Brandon?" I said. He gave a confused and bewildered look, almost like he was sizing me up, dissecting me and my entire manhood with one gaze up and down. Now, I'd just come from watching church online with my mom. It's Mother's Day, so even though we were watching it in my mom's living room, I dressed nice. I was wearing dress pants, a dress shirt, and dress shoes. He looked at me and said, You're not the one taking these goats." Now, I'm not gonna lie. His biased judgment on my clothes, not to mention my ability to nurture and care for livestock, stung a little bit. "Yeah," I said, I'm Tony. He did that whole stare through your soul and judge everything about you thing again, but this time it was directed towards my Kia Optima. "You have someone else meeting you here?" "Nope, just us." "You ain't taking these goats in that car." Okay, now I might be new at this whole farming thing, but I've read a whole lot of articles and watched a lot of YouTube videos on goats. And there is nothing that I have come across that gave any inclination that goats were snobs and preferred one car manufacturer over another. And even though Kia might have started in Japan, they're all American made right now. So I didn't understand what was going on. And my Kia might not be a Lexus or a BMW, but it's a really nice car. It has heated and cooled leather seats. It has a heated steering wheel. It even has Sirius satellite radio. This guy's judging me and my automobile was becoming just a little too offensive. And I wasn't about to take it anymore. Why can't I take the goats in my car? "Well, I mean, if you want your car to smell like burnt urine and manure, have at it, buddy." And then it hit me, the smell. Now, I had read online that male goats stink, but how bad could it really be? I mean, after all, we had 13 acres. I was a good 10 yards from the horse trailer, but it made my eyes water. Physical tears coming down. Brandon and I made small talk. Amanda and I peeked over the trailer at our new goat friends while plugging our noses, of course. We passed over the cash and gave Brandon the directions to our house because he generously offered to drive them to our farm. It was less than 10 minutes away. I got back into the car. I looked over at my beautiful wife who was smiling from ear to ear. "Happy Mother's Day, babe. We're farmers." Now, we'd spent weeks getting our property ready for our new family members. We had shelter for them in the barn, and about 5 of our acres we had fenced off for them to roam. The entire perimeter of the 5 acres had 5-strand barbed wire fencing, but on the roadside, close to the house, we'd put up strong mesh fencing because I'd read on YouTube or on Wikipedia that goats were escape artists. Brandon and his wife were amazed at our property and the new home that we created for these goats. He said, this is 15 times more space than they had at our place. They're going to be in goat heaven. I put my arm around my wife's shoulders. We're really doing this. We're farmers. He opened up the back of that trailer. "The boy's name is Frankie," he said. "He's solid black, a beautiful goat. As soon as we got out of the trailer, he looked at me and began to pee all over his beard. "Don't worry," Brandon said. "They think that's sexy." "That's sexy?" Frankie then came right up to me and began to rub his urine-soaked head all over my dress pants legs. Oh, that's just him showing affection. He really likes you." Lucky me. We guided Frankie out into the field where he went right to grazing and eating. He really was in heaven. The mama's name was Clara, and she and her baby were still hunkered back in the back corner of the trailer. Brandon said, "We may need to carry them out." I looked at him and said, "Don't worry, I've got this. They need to bond with me." I walked into the trailer, bent down to pick up Clara. She reared back on her two hind legs and slammed her horned head right into my shins with the force of a military tank. She brought me to my knees and tears to my eyes, and then took off running out of the trailer, across the field, under the 5-strand barbed wire fence, across the neighbor's field with her 8-day-old baby girl right behind her. By the time that I came to my senses and limped out of the trailer, they were long gone. Frankie looked up at me with a mouthful of flowers as if to say, "Women, what can you do?" I looked at Brandon with desperation. He shrugged his shoulders and looked at me and said, "She's a runner." Without saying another word, he got into his truck and began to drive off. I looked at Amanda. Surely he's going to go get the goats, right? But we watched as he turned the opposite way out of our driveway and drove out of sight. We just spent all of our money on these goats, and in the first 30 seconds of goat ownership, I now had 2 broken legs, urine-stained dockers, and the only goat that was left was Frankie, the stinky boy. Fortunately, like I said before, I married an amazing woman, and Amanda yelled for the kids and took off after the goats. By the time that I caught up to them, remember, I was very impaired from my goat attack. They were a quarter of a mile down the main road and across the street. They'd spotted them in the neighbor's field. The problem was the grass in the neighbor's field was being harvested for hay, and they hadn't been harvested yet. He has over 120 acres, and we had no clue where the goats were. So we're running through the field in waist-high grass, trying to find a goat that comes up to my knees and a baby goat that barely reaches my ankles. After 30 minutes of wandering around aimlessly through this field, I got to the top of a hill where I could see for miles and miles, but I didn't see any goats. What I could see from this vantage point was I could see the trail that they had carved through the grass. So 4 of us snuck up on them on each side where the trail ended. When we got closer, we could see them. They were laying down peacefully, resting in the grass. They must have been worn out from this ordeal as well. But in all of my research on goats, no one ever mentioned that goats were world-class sprinters. The second that we got close to them, the second that we would make our move, they were gone. So for over an hour, we would try to corner and catch, but they proved time and time again to be too quick and too cunning. Clara would toy with me. She would stare at me across the field as if she were sizing me up, but as soon as I would get within 10 feet, she would wink at me and be gone with her baby right behind her. I finally lost it. I'd had enough. No more Mr. Nice Guy. I was tired, I was hungry, I was dirty, and I was sick of being played for a fool by 2 goats. I was done with the sneaking attack, so I took off running full speed through the field, screaming like a wild man. We ran up the hill, down one side and up the other, through creeks and crevices, all the while Amanda and the kids screaming at me to stop the madness. Now, while the mama goat had more stamina than a Kenyan marathon runner, baby goat soon ran out of steam, and I swooped down and picked her up into my arms. I turned towards my family with that baby goat in my outstretched arms like I was in the scene of The Lion King. That was until I was dropped back to my knees by the sudden shocking blast of horns in the back of my legs. But I was not about to give up now. I'd gone too far and I was not letting go of that baby. Clara began charging at me again and again and again. I was fearful for my life, I'm not gonna lie, but I found a sudden burst of energy and I ran through that field with the baby in my outstretched arms and Mama Clara charging after me in hot pursuit. Amanda saw me running towards her, an angry goat running after me. She began yelling at me, screaming at me, but I couldn't decipher what she was saying, and to this day, she still won't repeat what it was. I made my way to Amanda, handed off the baby to her, and quickly turned around, ready for battle like a matador in a fighting ring. But I guess that Clara had bored with the chase or became distracted by the flowers in the field because she was a good 40 yards away from me snacking on some daisies. We tried to lure her with the cries of her baby, finally getting her out of the field and onto the road. But as soon as we would make a move, she was gone. It was getting dark. We hadn't seen a trace of Clara in over an hour. We wandered around aimlessly through the neighborhood, talking to neighbors and searching through vacant barns. It had been 5 hours at this point. We were all exhausted. We'd missed Mother's Day lunch with my mom and Mother's Day dinner with Amanda's family. We were done. We were ready to call it quits. The way that we figured it, we had 2 out of the 3 goats. That wasn't too bad. And so Amanda and I began discussing what we would need to buy at Tractor Supply to bottle feed the baby. We checked on our phone and Tractor Supply closed in 30 minutes, so we had to hurry. We were worn out mentally, we were worn out physically, we were worn out emotionally, and I was wearing worn out clothes. We climbed back into the Kia, Amanda still holding on to the little baby goat, turned out of our drive onto the main road, and there she was. I quickly threw my car into park, not even bothering to turn on my emergency flashers, and took off down the asphalt street. Now, I can't prove it to you, but Amanda will verify. I'm pretty sure that the theme music from Chariots of Fire was blasting from my car stereo. I glanced behind me. Amanda was leaning out the window, cheering me on in slow motion. Clara saw me and took off, but I was already hot on her tail. I dove full sail, tackled Clara to the ground like a linebacker sacking a quarterback in the Super Bowl. And I heard out of the back of my mind, Amanda shout from a quarter mile away, "He got her!" I stood up, went to pick her up, and she slipped right out of my hands. "He didn't get her!" I heard her shout. But Clara must have been stunned at my athletic ability, because she stumbled and stammered, trying to gain her composure and her footing to make another getaway. And her wobbling gave me just enough time to pounce back on top of her, wrestle her to the ground, put her in a bear hug that she could never escape from. "He got her again!" And I heard all of our kids let out a celebratory cheer. I got into the back seat of the Kia, holding on to that goat, not about to let go. We drove back up to the barn where I carried Clara and Amanda carried the baby into the pen enclosure. As I walked by, Frankie looked up from his grazing and gave me a head nod, as if to say, "Good job, my friend." It cost us 6 hours, 4 skinned knees, 7 ticks that we picked off of us later, 2 great meals, ruined pants, ruined shirts, and ruined shoes. But it was a Mother's Day that we will never forget. Later that night, Amanda and I sat on our front porch overlooking countless miles of farmland, witnessed a breathtaking sunset. And just like that, we were farmers.
Thank you, Tony, for a wonderful story. You know, I was thinking recently my lawnmower tore up and somebody had recommended that I get some goats. But after hearing that story, I think I'll wait a little bit longer.